Hey everybody, Ian from Novel Music here, and I'm really excited to show you Polymath, which is our flagship 4-track polyphonic sequencer that has some tricks up its sleeve. So let's take a look. When you load Polymath, it's a bigger device. It has lots of parameters for us to mess with, so I'm here to try to demystify some of that. First thing, let's take a look on the left-hand side of the device. Here we have the master play button, so this enables playback. The through control, which allows MIDI to pass through the device in case you want to hear, like I am right now, playing some notes. Clock inputs. Now this is important. This device requires a separate clock in order to be driven. And so the Seeds collection includes 2 clocks. We have chronology and Sweet 16. And they both provide pulses that would be appropriate to drive Polymath. This is where you choose. There are 26 ports A through Z to choose from. By default, WXYZ is what's chosen since that is the default for here's chronology. I've already set this up. The outputs are W, X, Y, and Z for 4 different clocks. There'll be a separate video about this device, but just know for now that there are 4 clocks, each one a different division of a main 16th note pulse, so divided by 2, divided by 3, divided by 6, and divided by 1. The next bit to look at here on the left-hand side is the reset feature. By default, this is set to none. However, you can set it to send a hard reset, meaning all sequencer lanes start at step 1 at the top of every bar, depending on how you have that set in your live set. Random. And after that, it's 1 through 16, each one of these numbers representing a quarter note beat. Push, this is a control to enable or disable the custom push layout that comes with this device. I will make a separate video detailing how that works, but if you have a push 1 or 2 device, then you will have additional controls available without having to go to the computer in order to have some fun using this sequencer. And then we have the sequencer track itself. This is what you'll use most often in this portion of the device. This allows you to change the track that you're working on. So there are, like I said, 4 tracks. They're all identical, have the same options. It's just a matter of how you fill the sequencer lanes. And lastly, you can always check the current iteration of the device. This is what we're shipping, is version 1.0, tested with the most recent version of Ableton Live and Max for Live. And you can always visit novelmusic.org by clicking on the logo. There are 2 tabs up here that you'll be working with quite a bit. The default view here is to look at the current track, and these are the parameters in the track, which I'll go over in a moment. And then we have also what's called all tracks, and this tab controls parameters for all 4 tracks. So if there's an idea you want to try, but you want to apply it across all 4, this is where you would go. Why don't we get a little sequence going here? This is just a basic synth sound that I've got plugged in. Let's make it a 12-step sequence. All right. Now, the reason this is being driven is because down here you can see I have C1, 2, 3, and 4. C stands for clock. So this is where you select which of the clock inputs that are listed over here, W, X, Y, and Z, are used to drive the sequence. So clock 1 is the default here, which is running at, I believe, an 8th note here at 100 beats per minute. Now, to make that a little more rhythmically interesting, why don't we try adding another clock input so that the 2 pulses will work together. Now we're getting something quite different, and if I fill this in with some more notes, we can really hear more of the rhythm. So you have your basic playback controls any sequencer would have, including stop, forward, reverse, and random. Okay, now let's go back to forward. On the left-hand side here, trigger, we have the trigger interval. So how many notes will be tested for a trigger? So if this is by default set to 1, which is probably what you'll use most of the time. But if we set this to 2, note that it's only processing every other note. 3 would process every 3 notes, so on and so forth, up to 8. Now, by process, what I mean, then it goes to this next stage, which is the percentage chance that the step will be activated, be triggered. Okay, so 100% by default. If we start lowering this, then you notice that 70% of the triggers are going through. Now, this trigger is not completely random. It actually favors the stronger parts of the beat metrically. So quarter note is divided into 4 16th notes, then 16th notes 2 and 4 are less favored in this scenario. Offset allows us to change the final sounding octave. This is just a quick way to control that. Reset, this is by default is turned on. So if we did set the reset to 3, let's say every 3 beats, turn the clock on, the click. Nice, now we have a nice 3-beat groove going here. And again, if you set this, let's say I have a 5/4 bar, 5/4 meter for the project, and I set this to bar, then it will reset at the on every downbeat of the 5/4 measure. So that's how that works out. I'll put it back to 1/4. I'm more of a 1/4 person when it comes to live, since I work in a lot of mixed meters. It's much easier just to play with a steady quarter note pulse. Scales is the next section to look at here. You always have the option of 2 scales at any time, which are chosen here, set by this all tracks. The top part of the all tracks page includes 2 scales. You have, and keys, of course. You have your 12 keys that are possible. And then your scales, you have the usual suspects, and including custom scales, which come preset with some that I've just made, but you can change them. They're in red, and you actually can click to decide which notes are active in that case. So you can create your own custom scales if you want to have more than what the preset scales are. Over here, we have a couple things. I'll start at the bottom, actually. This slider, you decide if you're going to be favoring scale 1 more or scale 2. In this case, C major or C minor. Scales are not binary in this case. Instead, I treat them as a continuum. So here's major, of course. Well, let's turn off the reset feature here. Okay. Now minor. But you can have in between. You hear that? The scale degrees keep shifting a little here and there. And as I slide it more back to 1, then I only get, when it's all the way set to 1 here, I only get the major scale. And if I set it over here to 2, I only get the minor scale. Next thing to look at here are these offsets for the scale. So the current scale is C major. I have the notes C, D, E, F, G, A, and B available to me, and I can actually have the sequence start the lowest note. This is what this means. Where does it start? It starts on C by default here, but if I say move it to A, now it shifts. It keeps the same shape, the same contour, so it's a way of keeping a certain musical motive going, but giving us a little more variety of not always starting on the same scale degree each time. So we can move this around to our liking. You can link it to scale 2 as well and move them both at the same time if you want. Note, if you move scale 2, that will remain independent from 1, but if you move 1, then it snaps. The default is having this off. And lastly, above, you'll see 2 hub input ports. So, as I mentioned, hub has 26 ports, A through Z. You can select one. I will choose A in this case. And anything broadcasting MIDI information on port A is going to be captured here by Polymath and control the scale offset. So I have over here a MIDI control track which is set up to send on port A. Now, I played middle C, nothing changed. I play A, and now I'm on A, G, F. What happens when I play a B flat? I get a B. So this thing also quantizes your MIDI input. So if you play a note that doesn't fall in the scale, which is fine, you're still going to get a sound that is consonant with the scale. Position. This here is where we control the loop brace, essentially. So I control how long the loop is here with this control. Stick it on 12. And then this is the shift function. It shifts where we are in the scale, in the sequence. So you can have, totally different types of material over here that you pivot to whenever it is that you need. All of these parameters, by the way, are mappable in live, so they are automatable and mappable. So you have a lot of control if you want to modulate any of these. Expand, what it does is it takes the current notes that you have and adds additional notes. It's adding density to the sequence. And it goes all the way up to 10. And that's to the top. What's useful is you can roll back and go back to what you had. If you make a change to the sequence, like I've just sort of changed it here, now it's going to be a new set of randomly added notes to, again, add to the density of the sequence. Note, if you, let's say I'm on number 2 here, expansion 2, and I add to it, the device now thinks that this should be expansion level 0. So if you are working with something and a sequence, you expand it, you like what you have, if you want to make that now the main sequence that then could be built on from there and expanded, then all you need to do is make a addition or just toggling a step on and off, and now that will confirm to the device that this should be the main base level to be expanded upon. Now we have 8 lanes here. Notes is where you apply which notes to be triggered on the grid. Octave, you can choose octaves below or above, 2 in each direction. Velocity allows us to choose how loud a note is going to be, and this is very much dependent on your settings of where you're sending the MIDI information to, meaning how the instrument is set up. If you have it set up not to be so responsive to velocity messages, well, you're just not going to notice much from this lane. Duration allows us to control how long a note will last. Can be even shorter. And again, depending on the attack, decay, sustain, release settings of the instrument you're sending this to, it could be software or hardware, of course, you'll get different effects with this. We have strum, which if we add a, let's add a little chord there, and then, as you can hear, it quickly strummed from the lowest to the top note, and depending on where we have this, the higher it goes, the slower it goes. If we do the opposite direction, it will go the opposite direction from highest note down to the lowest. I like that. I'm gonna keep it. Ratchets allow us to have a rapid retriggering of the note. Bend is pitch bend, so we can control up and down. And then the final lane is modulation, which allows us to modulate up to 3 parameters. Let's go ahead and take the delay. So it's in tandem with the note lane. Well, they're all actually in tandem, of course. So what's nice about this is it's sort of creates a predictable type of parameter modulation. You have controls for the minimum level that the lowest bar would represent when it's all the way down, for instance. That means it'll be 24% of the parameter's value range. Maximum you can control will, by the way, go up to 200% for different scenarios where it is just helpful to get to that range that you're looking for. And we also have R, which stands for ramp time, so you can ramp to the values over a millisecond range here, the lowest being 1 millisecond, which is essentially instantaneous, up all the way up to 1 second. We could also map something else here. How about the oscillator position? And to me, this already adds a lot more interest than what I had going before, since the sound, the timbre of the sound, the color of it, is changing now in a predictable fashion over time through the sequence. Both the notes and mod tabs do not have additional options under them. However, the octave, velocity, duration, strum, ratchet, and bend sequencer lanes do, and this represents how much of the sequencer value should actually affect the resulting sound. So let's use, for instance, duration as an example. Here I'll have, now the notes are a bit more sustained. If I change this down, now the duration only being 4%, we're actually taking these values essentially and pushing them all down, scaling them down. So it's a way of doing this without having to actually change every slider in your sequence. All of these, octave, velocity, strum, bend, they go up to 200%, and then duration goes all the way up to 1000%. Ratchets is different, so we have two things that we can change here. This is the speed of the ratchets, so F and S, fast and slow. And then we have the envelope for the ratchets, so we have different options here. Flat would mean that they're all the same volume or velocity, each trigger, retrigger. Rise starts from a lower velocity and rises to the destination velocity. You can probably hear that, I hope, that it is rising. We also have fall, which does the opposite. Starts at the whatever the assigned velocity for that step is and falls down to a low velocity level. And random is exactly that. It's random. It'll be a different velocity for each retrigger without any set pattern to it. The Polymath sequencer lanes have deviate options. Each lane has its own deviate percentage chance of deviation, the polarity, meaning the direction of deviation, and then the range of deviation. Less than or equal to whatever you're setting. So here we have the octave being deviated either above an octave or below an octave of the assigned value. You can do this for all of these. Duration. Maybe I want to add to the duration some of the time. Now this can end up being quite random. We got a little bit of pitch bend deviation. It can be quite random. So to combat that, we actually have what's called this lock function. So it's a slider that allows us to, as we move from left to right, we get all the way to the right. Now, whatever deviations are happening are locked. They will stay the same every time the sequence wraps around. And if I want to audition different changes, I could just slide the lock over, allowing for some new values, but maybe not all of them to be rewritten. Now, something can be locked and I can still decide, you know what, that's too much pitch bend, so I can roll back on the amount or how often it happens. Everything still remains locked. I should say, this also applies to the playback random control. So when it's in the lock position, it actually will keep the same random order, which includes repeats of steps. It's completely random, but it can be locked. Now, the All Tracks tab, I've gone over a little. This is where you choose the scales. It's also where you can decide that all of how the behavior of all 4 tracks at once. So the trigger is available here for all of them. The offset, putting it the final output up or down several octaves, is available here. You can expand all 4 sequencers here instead of just one at a time. And you can change the scale that they're reading from all together over here, since that is a very musical thing that most people would probably want to be able to do. And we can lock everything from here as well. And depending on which lane you have selected, you can choose the global depth and the global deviate value for all 4 sequencer tracks for that particular lane. Now, just a couple things left I'd like to go over with this device. We have this going on track 1. Let's get a bass going. So I have here a track that's a bass, and it has one of our hub devices, which is a utility that sends and receives MIDI data across the live set. And I am going to receive port B on this track so that my bass synth can be played. So Polymath is going to send that MIDI data that it generates in the sequencer here to port B on track 2 here. So let's add some bass. Maybe we can make it whatever length we want. Great. And we can also add some modulation stuff. Perhaps we'll modulate also the frequency. Let's go ahead and change the range. Great. And maybe we want it to run a little faster. Let's choose clock 4. And let's change from major to minor, both tracks at once. Back to major. And if I want to go in between, a little bit of both major and minor. If I like what I'm hearing, I just lock it. Great. Well, that is a bit of an overview of what this device does. It can really be the brains of a live set, an improv set. It could be used to control your modular synthesizer hardware. It can be used to control your non-modular synthesizer hardware. Anything that takes MIDI can be used by this device. So it is available now as part of the Seeds collection on our website, www.novelmusic.org. Please consider subscribing to this channel. I am producing videos for all of our devices, these tutorials. Plus, I'll do additional content just showing some examples of what you can do with the Seeds collection. So thank you for watching this video, and stay tuned for more content. Thanks.